everybody, and welcome back to another stud story. We're going to take you back a little ways on this one. Actually, we did this on January 4th. We did part one of this, and it was kind of a story about my brother and I, first farm that my dad ever bought, and between Mobile and Pensacola, Florida. A beautiful farm, really nice place, and he had a rodeo there in 1958, and wrestling went on the air there in 1954, WKRG, for you people down there along the Gulf Coast. And it was the first wrestling show ever there on television. And it was extremely popular. Popular enough that they drew 40,000 people at Ladd Memorial Stadium for an event. So it's a pretty good indication there was a lot of people who were watching wrestling back in those days. And my father buys this farm, 300-acre farm, and I think we talked about it in the first episode, him buying a bulldozer and all that stuff, and how my brother and I have to clean up the farm, and it turned into a beautiful place. Anyway, he decided he wanted to become a rodeo man, and he actually bought a rodeo. He bought the bulls, the Bomber bulls, and the steers, and the calves, and the broncs, and the whole deal. And so he decided on the Easter Sunday, 1958, that he was going to have a rodeo on the farm. And just to back up a little bit, for those that may not remember, and I think this episode was probably about 2 months ago. I don't have the exact stud story number, but if you want to look back, you can hear the first part of it. But I kind of talked about some of the things that happened at the rodeo and how he set up for the rodeo. What a huge success it was, how it shut down a major highway for 10 miles in both directions because so many people tried to come. It was set up to maybe hold the rodeo arena and the bleachers around it. Maybe 3,000, 4,000 people, probably had 10,000 people. Bleachers collapsed, all kinds of problems. It was a disaster, basically. It was a one-day disaster. And so along with this rodeo, my dad being a kind of a crazy dude, he just had all these goofball ideas, but it was ways to make money. And so he said, we're going to have a lot of people here, and and it's going to be on Easter Sunday. They expect to have a lot of kids, and he says, just to make sure we have a lot of kids, we're going to make up Easter eggs, and we're going to hide them over. He showed a big area. There was a lot of pine trees, pretty high grass around the trees, maybe a 5-acre parcel. There was a pretty big area. He said, we're going to have an Easter egg hunt, and we're going to have a gold egg and a silver egg and a bronze egg, and you get a special prize. You find that. He went through the whole process. And I think either me or Rob, as young boys, we said, well, how many eggs are you talking about? And he said, well, how about 1,000? So my poor mom had to color 1,000 Easter eggs. Took her 2 weeks, basically, to get the eggs done to hide. And then he sent my brother and I, and we had my cousin Jimmy Golden, happened to be visiting us. And so he loaded up the truck with these 1,000 eggs, and he drove us over to the place where we were going to hide them. Now the pine trees were anywhere from 10 feet tall to 30 feet tall, very mature. Some of them were mature, and some of them were very small. Basically, he didn't really say to us exactly what he wanted to do, and that was a big mistake because we're about 8, 9, 10 years old. He just said, hide these eggs, boys. And he says, when you're done, then come back across the field to get me. I'll bring the truck back. So he leaves the truck full of eggs there. And we start hiding them. Well, as young boys, we were very conscientious, maybe a little too conscientious. And we finally said, well, let's just get a shovel and let's dig holes and bury some of them, right? So we started burying them. We started climbing pine trees and putting them in the forks of the trees. And it just was one thing after another, idea after idea, making it difficult for these kids to find these eggs. Now the grass was probably foot tall, and then you could put them in there, and that would have been hard enough for them to find, but we made it almost impossible. We took the gold egg and put it, I think, in the top of a 25, 30-foot tall pine tree, climbed the tree, left it up there like some little kid's going to be able to find it. So it comes time to have the Easter egg hunt. And the rodeo's in progress, and they stop the rodeo, and you got an announcer who's announcing the different events and the bull riders and all the information that went along with the rodeo. And he says, "Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the Easter egg hunt." And when he did that, me and Rob and Jimmy, we went up to the big barn that was right over the rodeo arena, and we could see the crowd out there developing out beside the rodeo arena. And it was amazing. It was like, it must have been 500, 700 kids, and all of their moms and some of their dads. And the field where the eggs were a pretty good walk. It was a couple of 100 yards between the arena and out there to where the eggs all were. So, and then the announcer says, "It's time for the Easter egg hunt, and you connecting, everybody get together over here in this general area, and right over there is where the eggs are," the whole deal. And there were prizes going to be given away for certain eggs, like I said. And so when they started to cross the field, that whole crowd, I remember the three of us as young boys were going, "Wow, look how many people that is, And so they got over there, and kids started looking for the eggs. And wow, it wasn't long till, the kids were all crying. "We couldn't find no eggs. I don't have any eggs. Where's the eggs? I don't have any." They had their baskets. They didn't have any eggs in the basket. And a couple of the mothers came back across, and somehow they tracked down my dad, and then said, "Well, what a phony deal this is. The kids are all over there and they can't find any eggs, And Dad's going, "Well, wait a minute now. And, there's 1,000 eggs over there." And they go, well, and then he goes over and he starts looking, and he looks up and he sees one up in a tree. And oh boy, wow. It didn't take long till he makes the trip and he finds us. He's like, "Oh boy." Yeah. And as usual, I think he conked our heads. That was the old deal with him. He would just, rather than whip us, he would just say, "Hold your head over here." He'd crack you on the top of the head like that. Sometimes if he didn't get you good enough, he'd have a second one. There you go, I've had him bust my head, the top of my head, and it started bleeding, blood run down the side of your face. It was worse than getting your butt whipped. It was much worse than getting your butt whipped. Anyway, we got our heads conked for it. So, same rodeo. About 2 weeks before the rodeo, we had some Shetland ponies. And he says, "We need to figure out a way to, so little kids can ride the Shetland ponies." And so he's a welder, and he went and built a carousel. Basically, you could put about 6 ponies in between it had little things that ran off, forked off of it, and 6 ponies on it. And the ponies walked around and around in a circle. And the moms could get on could walk with their children if they were really small beside them, and it started out really great, except the 2-3 days before we got ready to have the rodeo, we were practicing with the ponies. And we had a couple of ponies on there that were wild, and they just got to where they would just stare and, just rearing up and trying to run. And if they ran, then all of them had to run, or none of them could. It was just, we could see it was going to be a real disaster. Another disaster in this rodeo. So we said, Dad, I don't think this is going to work like you think, "Oh, yeah, we'll make it work, So he'd go over and he'd just slap the ponies around if they weren't doing the right thing. And then finally, the day of the event, we said, "Dad, I think you're making a big mistake with this little pony ride." No, we're going to do fine. So we have the pony ride. This is just after the debacle that goes on over across the field where the poor kids come back all crying because they couldn't find any Easter eggs. And then they start the pony rides. And think about the third set of people that we put on there. And there was a crowd of probably 100 people in line waiting to get their little kids on the ponies. And so, you know, you put the little baby on the pony, and the mama got next to them, and they put their arm around them, and they walked. The idea was they're going to walk with the child and kind of hold on to them. Some of them didn't need to have the mom. But anyway, they would get on there, and then you would start the ride. The ride would go maybe 5 minutes. You'd walk them for 5 minutes, and they would all get off, and another set of people would get on. About the third set of people got on. And all of a sudden, man, the two bad ponies out of the 6 that were out there got to running. I mean, not just walking and not just trotting. They got to actually running full speed on the carousel. Well, when they started running, it pulled the rest of the ponies around at a faster speed. And when that started happening, the mamas were getting hit in the heads by the poles that were behind them. The kids were falling off on the ground. And then they got to such a speed that they turned the entire carousel upside down. Ponies were laying on their backs. Some of them were wrapped into the deals, tied into where you couldn't hardly get them up. There was bodies laying everywhere. It was like, oh my gosh, man. and my dad's dealing with all this for the entire day. Not only had they knocked down 400 brand new pecan trees that were about 10 feet tall, everybody parked and just pulled right over top the trees and parked off all these pecan trees, and they just destroyed the farm. But then we had the debacle with the Easter egg hunt, and we had the debacle with the pony ride, and then rodeo's about over. Last event is the bull riding. And so they had the bull riding, and Dad had a great rodeo arena. He'd spent a lot of money on the rodeo arena. And it was so good that they had these big, huge posts, and he had run a cable from the one end of the rodeo arena through the holes, and they would cut a big hole in the post. They run that cable around and link it into all the other poles on the rodeo arena. And so we get to the bull riding, end of the rodeo, just about the end of the rodeo. And like I said, the bleachers were just crammed full. They had twice as many people in the bleachers as they should have had. And so in the rodeo event, one of the bulls is so tough and so mean that he got next to the fence, and he bucked the guy off that was on top of him, and he went for the guy, and the guy kind of ducked underneath him, and he jumped up high enough that he got his front part of his body on top of the cable that was running through all these posts all the way around the entire arena. And it was obviously tight. It was very tight. So when he got his body up there with his chest on there, then his body slid forward a little bit. Now right there is the bleachers. He says big section, the bleachers down both sides and both ends of the arena. And there's the bleachers right there. So when his body slid forward and his back legs got hung up on the pole, he catapulted himself over the entire, out of the arena and into a whole section of bleachers. People still in the bleachers. They see it's happening, it's right there in front of them, but they don't think this big 2,000-pound bull is going to end up in their laps. But it does. It just comes over. He lands on his back in the bleachers. It collapses the bleachers. Talk about the disaster. That was the big end. That was the worst disaster of all. Thank God it came at the end of this rodeo. But I remember ambulances coming for probably 2 hours, carrying people one after another, putting them in the ambulances and taking them away. So that was kind of what my dad was all about. Some of these big events, something outlandish, something that never been done before. Let's have a little rodeo on Easter Day. It was a nice little idea and a great little thought. But what a disaster it turned out to be. And oddly enough, I remember asking him one time, the first time I got old enough to know what a lawsuit was. And I said, you remember that rodeo, Dad? How many lawsuits did you have from that rodeo that day? And he says, boy, he goes, and he says, and this was 1958. It's a much different day and time than today, because he says, you know, I didn't have a single lawsuit. And I was like, wow, how in the heck is that possible? So, you know, takes you way back. It tells you the difference in our society between 1958 and where we are today. There's no way you could have ever paid off all the lawsuits if that had happened any time in the 20th or the 21st century. And so let's just call this one my dad's disastrous Easter rodeo. And I really appreciate everybody joining me for these. I hope you like this one. It's a little bit different. It's not really so much about wrestling, but it's about a really crazy wrestler.